Okay, the masked professor is on the air, and we have in attendance my most faithful student. Neither snow, nor rain, nor sleet, nor gloom of day prevents him from the completion of his rounds. All right.
Welcome to Zoom. Enter your meeting ID followed by pound. Enter your participant ID followed. You are in the meeting now. There is one other participant in the meeting.
Hooray for other participants. Okay, so, once more, under the breach, dear friends, once more, or close the wall up with our English dead. Oh, wait, no, we're not English, never mind. All right, so we have arrived at the excitement of Section 3, professional obligations. So, Section 3, professional obligations, Part 1, engineers shall be guided in all their relations by the highest standards of honesty and integrity. Again, engineers are not scientists as such, but engineering is a branch of applied science. I don't know about you, but I want people in science to be honest and not be lying and saying, oh, don't worry about those microbes, they're okay. 1A, engineers shall acknowledge their errors and shall not distort or alter the facts. Kind of important. We can't fix a problem or an error that we do not acknowledge has been made. 1B, engineers shall advise their clients or employers when they believe a project will not be successful. Again, this seems like a regular part of life. If something's not going to be successful, we need to acknowledge that so that we can either fix it so it will be successful or move on. Part 1C, engineers shall not accept outside employment to the detriment of their regular work or interest. Before accepting any outside engineering employment, they will notify their employers. Engineers fall into the category of being professionals. Being a professional means, well, it means you're a white-collar worker, even though as I look at my shirt, the collar is red, comrade. A professional means that you are not working for an hourly wage, but that you are governed by your integrity and and by getting the job done rather than by an hourly wage. Although sometimes we still end up working at an hourly wage. Okay, Part 1D. Engineers shall not attempt to attract an engineer from another employer by false or misleading pretenses. I have actually seen this happen I have been made false promises to come and work, although not in engineering, but I have also seen false promises made to people to lure them to work for another company in engineering. It's not pretty. Part 1E. Engineers shall not promote their own interest at the expense of the dignity and integrity of the profession. Okay? We need to remember at all times we owe a duty to our profession. It's kind of the same duty we owe to the world, to leave it a better place than we found it in whatever way we can. Part 1F. Engineers shall treat all persons with dignity, respect, fairness, and without discrimination. I hope that's already part of what you do and how you think. Although, dog knows, I have certainly seen plenty of people not follow this. All right. Section 3, Part 2. Engineers shall at all times strive to serve the public interest. Part 2A. Engineers are encouraged to participate in civic affairs, career guidance for youths, and work for the advancement of the safety, health, and well-being of their community. Okay, so again, we have a higher duty to society that to work to make the world, or at least our world, our country, our state, our county, our city, a better place. Part 2B. Engineers shall not complete, sign, or seal plans and/or specifications that are not in conformity with applicable engineering standards. If the client or employer insists on such unprofessional conduct, they shall notify the proper authorities and withdraw from further service on the project. Okay, well, this is a tough one, but necessary. We cannot be drawn into acting in an unethical manner. Engineering standards, while they're often very cumbersome, are there for a reason. And that reason is safety, health, welfare of the public. We need to follow these guidelines. Part 2C. Engineers are encouraged to extend public knowledge and appreciation of engineering and its achievements. One of the unfortunate things I've seen in recent years is that people are poo-pooing science, scientists, engineers. Science and engineering are important. They are what has got us, along with some other things like law, to the civilizations that we have now. I always encourage you to extend public knowledge of engineering and its achievements. Part 2D, engineers are encouraged to adhere to the principles of sustainable development in order to protect the environment for future generations. This is actually a change from when I was in engineering school. When I was in engineering school, I was taught that we could regard the atmosphere and the ocean as inexhaustible reservoirs, that we could dump pretty much anything we wanted and not have to worry about it. Even at the time, I'm like, are you serious? You must be kidding me with this. But that was considered to be the standard at the time. I remember when I was a kid in the 1960s, and we were traveling, and my father pointed out to the side of the car, and he said, "Look, there's Gary, Indiana." Well, y'all may not realize Gary, Indiana was a steel town. I don't know if it still is or not. So I look over there, and all there is a giant gray cloud. In the 1960s, pollution was pretty bad in America. I'm very happy to say we have improved things a lot, although not as much as I would like, in the intervening time period. In the future, I would like to see us have more sustainable development, so that we eliminate all kinds of pollution that we're making now. A lot of people are up in arms about climate change. You know, oh my God, the boogeyman's going to come and get us. The earth is going to get too warm for humans to live, or the earth is going to be too cold for humans to live. You know what? Neither of those worries me as much as the amount of pollution we're still dumping into the atmosphere, into the oceans. Okay, so that's my little diatribe on pollution there. Yeah. Part 2E. Engineers shall continue their professional development throughout their careers and should keep current in their specialty fields by engaging in professional practice, participating in continuing education courses, reading in the technical literature, and attending professional meetings and seminars. Oh, it says and seminar. I think they actually meant seminars, because there's no such thing as you go to one seminar and you're done for life. This is kind of important. Look, the field is constantly changing. When I was in engineering school, we got a very good education in what existed then. But now, we have a lot of technologies that weren't even dreamed of at that time. When I went to engineering school, Texas Instruments had just introduced the technology that you could take a picture of a circuit, and by adding a few spots of chemicals, it would be a circuit. Today, that is laughably old style technology. Today, in my phone, I have more computer power than it took to get man to the moon in the 1960s. A lot of the technologies that we have today hadn't been thought of or were only being thought of and invented when I was in engineering school. I started engineering school in the late 70s and went through in the early 80s. 3D printing, the very first experiments in 3D printing were being done then. Now, we have students that have their own 3D printers. You want to make something interesting? Okay, well, I'll sit down, I'll draw it, I'll put it in the machine makes it. Okay. Section 3, Part 3. Engineers shall avoid all conduct or practice that deceives the public. 3A. Engineers shall avoid the use of statements containing a material misrepresentation of fact or omitting a material fact. Okay, there's more than one way to lie. Right? One way to lie is just tell a lie. Like the old joke, my dog's got no nose. How does he smell? Just awful. No, wait, that's only, I guess, a partial lie. Sometimes it's tempting to lie. It seems like the easiest way. But you may have noticed quite a few times in this code, lying, misrepresentation, deception are mentioned. And those are not things that we want our engineers and technologists to be engaging in. All right, Section 3, Part 3, B. Consistent with the foregoing, engineers may advertise for recruitment of personnel. Okay, so remember, we can advertise to recruit personnel, but we can't lie about the conditions or what we're going to do for them. We have to keep keep to a non-deceptive, honest situation. Section 3, Part 3C. Consistent with the foregoing, engineers may prepare articles for the lay or technical press, but such articles shall not imply credit to the author for work performed by others. Okay, so we want to be sure that we give credit to the people who have done work. And not take the credit for ourselves when it belongs to others. Section 3, Part 4. Engineers shall not disclose without consent confidential information concerning the business affairs or technical processes of any present or former client or employer or public body on which they serve. Okay, so along with not lying, we have a duty to keep confidential information confidential. So in fact, because of work that I have done for clients or the government in the past, I know things that I'm never supposed to reveal, even though some of them are kind of stupid and nobody would even care, and yet I still have the duty not to reveal these things. Now, some things would be very serious to reveal. For example, personnel information from when I was a manager for Texas A&M or other projects. For that matter, I have a duty to keep confidential your grades and not reveal those under the FERPA Act. So even if your mother calls up and says, "What's my son's grade?" I have to tell her, "I'm sorry, ma'am, I can't tell you." Now, I can't remember anyone's mother ever calling me up and asking me, but I have had somebody's mother get in contact with me about their child's attendance in class or some other issue where I just say, "I'm sorry, I can't talk about that with you. I am bound by FERPA not to reveal this information." Now, under FERPA, I can discuss this in a very limited way with some of my colleagues. But usually that's like, I have a student who's doing this without revealing the student's name or anything of this nature. All right. Section 3, Part 4B. Engineers shall not, without the consent of all interested parties, participate in or represent an adversary interest in connection with a specific project or proceeding in which the engineer has gained particular specialized knowledge on behalf of a former client or employer. Okay, so this is kind of an extension of confidential information. There are all kinds of different confidential information that you may know. For example, in business and industry, it is perfectly legal to have a business process that you do not reveal to anyone except the people directly working with it. And that is expected to be kept confidential. So, for example, Coca-Cola, they have a secret formula to make Coke. Now, is it so secret no one has been able to tap into it? Well, pretty much. Actually, I don't know, a few years ago, well, I say a few years, it may be 10 or 15 years ago now, somebody actually stole the formula from Coke, and they tried to sell it to Pepsi. To their credit, the Pepsi Corporation not only said, no, we won't buy it, they turned the guy in and got him arrested. So I say, good on Pepsi. I've always liked Pepsi better than Coke anyway. But that is a secret business process. It is a closely held secret in the Coca-Cola Company and has been for a long time. And they are allowed to keep that as a secret, and revealing it, as per my example, can mean that you get sent away to prison. And I don't know about you, but I'm trying to avoid ever going to prison. I did once have a student tell me that he wanted to grow up to be an evil engineer. I wasn't really quite sure how to take that. Section 3, Part 5. Engineers shall not be influenced in their professional duties by conflicting interests. Part 5A. Engineers shall not accept financial or other considerations, including free engineering designs from material or equipment suppliers for specifying their product. Okay, so very often, well, for example, while I was in engineering school one summer, I worked for Horizon Engineering. We did the mechanical and electrical design for buildings. And one of the things that we had was we had files of drawings that were kind of generic drawings, right? This is how we set up the water heater. This is how we set up the heating, ventilation, air conditioning system, right? And we would use those in our building drawings because, you know what? When you put together a water heater, it's pretty much the same. No matter, I think we may have had a drawing of gas water heaters and we had a drawing of electric water heaters, right? Because although it may have only been gas, because at that time gas was used a lot more. Now a lot of times people prefer to have an all-electric home. Okay, but those were generic drawings that had been generated in our engineering firm that we used, right? Even though I'm sure suppliers would have been happy to say, oh, the New Point water heater, here is an engineering drawing of how that should be installed. Now, if the client has specified a certain kind of product, then it would be appropriate to say, yeah, okay, we can use their engineering drawings of how that is installed. Right, but otherwise, not so much. Part 5B, engineers shall not accept commissions or allowances directly or indirectly from contractors or other parties dealing with clients or employers of the engineer, in connection with work for which the engineer is responsible. In other words, let's not take any bribes. Sometimes in ethics, we say that the standard is, would you want your behavior to be published on the front page of the newspaper? And that anything you wouldn't want published, we know immediately is an unethical situation. Another standard sometimes people would put on it is, what would your grandmother think if she knew what you had done? Right, but we want to be straight up. Again, we need our engineers and technicians to be honest, to be trustworthy, to have integrity. All right. Pardon me. Section 3, Part 6. Engineers shall not attempt to obtain employment or advancement or professional engagements by untruthfully criticizing other engineers or by other improper or questionable methods. Okay, well, obviously, kind of important. We don't want to talk about people untruthfully. In fact, talking about other engineers or other engineering firms in general becomes a bit of a sore subject. If you talk about them and you malign their reputation, there is the possibility that you could be sued. And being sued, of course, is not a fun situation at all. So sometimes the best thing we can do is say nothing about these others. Improper or questionable methods, well, I think we should put ourselves down as against that in general. Part 6A. Engineers shall not request, propose, or accept a commission on a contingent basis under circumstances in which their judgment may be compromised. Okay, so again, conflict of interest kind of situation. We want to make sure that we're able to bring an objective judgment, our objective scientific and engineering judgment to every engagement. Section 3, Part 6B. Engineers in salaried positions shall accept part-time engineering work only to the extent consistent with the policies of the employer and in accordance with ethical considerations. Okay, so if you're in a salaried position that is essentially full-time work, we want to make sure our employer is aware of any extra work that we are performing. um, and to make sure that that falls inside the guidelines that our employer has given. Some employers are pretty loosey-goosey about that. But as I discussed on Monday, with Texas A&M, oh my God, we had to fill out the conflict of interest form every year and make sure that we reported everything extra that we did, even to the point that I was reporting teaching apprentices for the stagehands union. Section 3, Part 6, C. Engineers shall not, without consent, use equipment, supplies, laboratory, or office facilities of an employer to carry on outside private practice. Sometimes an employer will allow the use of their office or their facilities, their equipment, for some private practice. But again, we can't do that in a way where it is against the policies of the employer, or sometimes even to the detriment of the employer. Section 3, Part 7. Engineers shall not attempt to injure maliciously or falsely, directly or indirectly, the professional reputation, prospects, practice, or employment of other engineers. Engineers who believe others are guilty of unethical or illegal practice shall present such information to the proper authority for action. Okay, well, there are a lot of things that you can do that would be considered illegal or unethical as an engineer. A remedy is always to go to the State Board of Engineering and report people that that are doing these kinds of illegal or unethical things. Now, of course, depending on how illegal they are, you may want to skip the State Board of Engineering and go straight to the police. But I assume most cases are not going to rise to that level. Section 3, Part 7A. Engineers in private practice shall not review the work of another engineer for the same client, except with the knowledge of such engineer, or unless the connection of such engineer with the work has been terminated. Okay, so a friend has hired an engineer to do some work for them in their capacity as a professional engineer. That friend asks you to look that over. Well, unless they have fired the other engineer, or you have the other engineer's permission, you shouldn't do it. Section 3, Part 7B. Engineers in governmental, industrial, or educational employ are entitled to review and evaluate the work of other engineers when so required by their employment duties. All right, so For example, here at NTU, when we have building plans, it would be perfectly legal for them to say, Harry, you have a professional engineer's license. Would you look these plans over and make sure that everything is kosher? Right? That is a different situation than here in subsection A, where you have no connection. Section 3, Part 7C. Engineers in sales or industrial employ are entitled to make engineering comparison of represented products with products of other suppliers. Okay, so, but again, you can make the comparison, but it has to be in a truthful manner, right? You can't suddenly say, oh yes, and our product is so much better than the other guy's products that 7 out of 10 recommend it. You have to stick within a truthful comparison, and it should be based on engineering and science facts, not opinions. Section 3, Part 8. Engineers shall accept personal responsibility for their professional activities, provided, however, that engineers may seek indemnification for services arising out of their practice for other than gross negligence where the engineer's interests cannot otherwise be protected. Okay, so indemnification means protection legally from being sued. Right? So, for example, a client cannot sue you because you refuse to follow engineering standards in the design of their product, their building, their road, their whatever. However, if there is gross negligence, in other words, you didn't bother to check the standards, you knew the standards and ignored them, that is a cause for a lawsuit. All right, Section 3, Part 8A. Engineers shall conform with state registration laws in the practice of engineering. Okay, there are certain things as an engineer that you will not be allowed to do unless you are a registered professional engineer. I am a registered professional engineer in the state of Texas, and I kick myself because when I first moved to New Mexico, filling out the form to also be a registered engineer in New Mexico would have been very easy. Since then, they've changed the application process, even for those that already have a license in another state. Lots of engineers are licensed in multiple states. For example, if you are a professional engineer in Farmington, it would not be unusual for you to have a registration in Arizona, in Utah, in Colorado, because all three of those states are quite close. Or the same thing if you're in Durango, to have registrations in Colorado, New Mexico, Arizona, Utah. And I assume the same, but I can't think of any cities in Utah or Arizona that are really close to the Four Corners. Section 3, Part A, 8. Engineers shall not use association with a non-engineer, a corporation, or a partnership as a cloak for unethical acts. Again, being an engineer requires the highest levels of probity. Probity is another word for integrity. Honesty and integrity will serve you well. Once you start down the path of dishonesty and a lack of integrity, that is not a pretty situation. Okay. Section 3, Part 9, engineers shall give credit for engineering work to those to whom credit is due, and will recognize the proprietary interests of others. Okay, so give credit where credit is due, as the old saying reminds us. Part 9A, engineers shall, whenever possible, name the person or persons who may be individually responsible for designs, inventions, writings, or other accomplishments. So, we want to be sure, again, that we're giving credit to people who are creating intellectual property, right? Engineers create intellectual property. They do not steal it. So don't even be thinking about downloading those movies illegally. Part 9B, engineers using designs supplied by a client recognize that the designs remain the property of the client and may not be duplicated by the engineer for others without express permission. Okay. Copyright is inherent in any idea, any writing, as soon as you put it down in a form that is durable, in other words, that lasts, right? You draw up a CAD drawing, that the copyright of that belongs to you. And in fact, you can immediately apply for a patent. Although, you know, obviously what you do here in school is not necessarily, because you're often copying what someone else has done, it's not necessarily copyright when you do it again, right? But original ideas, for example, the sketches I made doodling in class during engineering school, those are copyright. Strangely enough, some of the ideas that I had in engineering school, I've actually seen other people bring into reality. Section 3, Part 9, C. Engineers, before undertaking work for others in connection with which the engineer may make improvements, plans, designs, inventions, or other records that may justify copyrights or patents, should enter into a positive agreement regarding ownership. This is a very tricky area. If what you do barely changes the original design, then you have not got a patentable idea. If you come up with something that does change or wildly improve the design, that may be patentable separately. However, very often the best way is to work with the people and make sure that you're staying on the right side of the law. It's much easier to build a partnership than a lawsuit. Okay. Section 3, Part 9D. Engineers' designs, data, records, and notes referring exclusively to an employer's work are the employer's property. The employer should indemnify the engineer for use of the information for any purpose other than the original purpose. Okay, so, for example, I have engineering journals of my work as an engineer that go back to when I first started working as an engineer. However, any designs that I may have that were developed for an employer, I can't just whip that design out and say, oh, that'll work over here. No, that design belongs to them. All right, well, apparently I should have put this footnote in when we were talking about sustainable development. Footnote number 1. Sustainable development is the challenge of meeting human needs for natural resources, industrial products, energy, food, transportation, shelter, and effective waste management, while conserving and protecting environmental quality and the natural resource base essential for future development. Let me make myself perfectly clear that I am entirely for sustainable development. Here's our difficulty, though. We have people right now that have no scientific training that we can tell, that are trying to tell us how we have to reimagine the future. They reimagine a future in which we have no automobiles, no airplanes, no power plants that use fossil fuels. This is not realistic. You might be able to do something like that for some of the larger cities, okay? Have a network of light rail, electric buses, whatever, that gets people around. How would that work here in New Mexico, where sometimes people live miles off the highway to begin with? So what are they gonna do? They are gonna get on a horse and ride to what used to be the highway, where now there's an electric train that comes by every 2 days, so that they can go to town to get groceries? Let's not be silly. Sorry, but these kind of people just get on my way. All right. We're heaving into sight of the end of the Code of Ethics for professional engineers. We have this statement. By order of the United States District Court for the District of Columbia, former Section 11C of the NSPE Code of Ethics, prohibiting competitive bidding and all policy statements, opinions, rulings, and other guidelines interpreting its scope have been rescinded as unlawfully interfering with the legal right of engineers protected under the antitrust laws to provide price information to prospective clients. Accordingly, nothing contained in the NSPE Code of Ethics, policy statements, opinions, rulings, or other guidelines prohibits the submission of price quotations or competitive bids for engineering services at any time or in any amount. Okay, so there was a time when engineers were not allowed to engage in competitive bidding for work. But the United States District Court said, wait a minute, kind of a violation of their rights there. Statement by the NSPE Executive Committee. In order to correct misunderstandings which have been indicated in some instances since the issue of the Supreme Court decision and the entry of the final judgment, it is noted that in its decision of April 25th, 1978, the Supreme Court of the United States declared the Sherman Act does not require competitive bidding. In other words, a company could contact your engineering firm and say, we want you to do work for us. They are not required to put that out for general competitive bidding. Now, of course, many companies do put things out for competitive bidding. Maybe they don't do enough work with engineers, that they have a firm that they like to work with, or maybe they're just cheap bastards and they want the best price they can get. It is further noted that, as made clear in the Supreme Court decision, 1, engineers and firms may individually refuse to bid for engineering services. Okay, so a company asks you to bid on doing some work for them, you can decline for any reason you want. You're too busy, you don't do that kind of work, or you just don't like the company or the people working there. 2, clients are not required to seek bids for engineering services. Again, a company can come to your company and say, hey, we want this kind of work done for us. How much will it cost us? And they don't have to go to anyone else except your company. 3, federal, state, and local laws governing procedures to procure engineering services are not affected and remain in full force and effect. Okay, so ordinarily, government contracts for engineering services have to be bid on and accepted through an ordinary competitive bidding process. 4, state societies and local chapters are free to actively and aggressively seek legislation for professional selection and negotiation procedures by public agencies. The state boards of professional engineers are kind of semi-official bodies. For example, I'm registered through the Texas Board of Professional Engineers. That is a semi-official body that was formed in the 1930s after they had a big water tower collapse and some people were killed because it had been designed by somebody that didn't know what they were doing. There are laws surrounding the use of professional engineers to specify designs and standards in every state. When in doubt, consult your local laws. 5, state registration board rules of professional conduct, including rules prohibiting competitive bidding for engineering services, are not affected and remain in full force and effect. State registration boards with authority to adopt rules of professional conduct may adopt rules governing procedures to obtain engineering services. Okay, so again, every state has its own board, and each board can create its own rules in connection with, as long as those rules are within the laws of that state, right? And require engineering standards to be used. 6, as noted by the Supreme Court, nothing in the judgment prevents NSPE and its members from attempting to influence governmental action. Okay, so again, engineers have the right to advocate politically for action that will enhance the profession. Or anything else, right? You don't like abortion, you have the right to go out and try and get anti-abortion laws passed. You're pro-guns, you have the right to go out and protest laws that you think would infringe on your Second Amendment rights. All right, note, in regard to the question of application of the code to corporations vis-a-vis real persons, business form, or type, should not negate nor influence conformance of individuals to the code. The code deals with professional services, which services must be performed by real persons. Real persons in turn establish and implement policies within business structures. The code is clearly written to apply to the engineer, and it is incumbent on members of NSPE to endeavor to live up to its provisions. This applies to all pertinent sections of the code. Okay, so the National Society of Professional Engineers wrote this code. This code, or something very similar, has been adopted by the boards of professional engineers in the 50 states. So, in fact, usually what they just do is they say, we adopt this, right? In Texas, to become a professional engineer, one of the things that I had to do was I had to read the actual laws of ethics for engineers in the state of Texas, and then I had to take a test on that. Right? This was only one of many things that were required to become a professional engineer in Texas. And of course, that's, well, we expect integrity from engineers. Even if you never become a professional engineer, we're still going to expect integrity from you. It's not something that is negotiable. In fact, it's becoming a lot more, other professions have adopted that stance more. For example, if you lie on your resume when you apply for a job, if they find out you have lied, that's a cause for firing right there. And that is something that you should keep in mind. We always want to represent ourselves truthfully and with integrity. If there has been a problem in the past, we want to admit that and be able to move on from that. All right. And, there we go. All right, so, I am going to go ahead and print this out for the students that are here, those of you who are watching this at home, your office, whatever, print out the National Society of Professional Engineers Code of Ethics. I am going to post quiz number 12, and what I want you to be able to do is to read the ethical situation. I'll have a couple of them posted, and be able to say what parts of the code you would invoke because of the situation. So what parts of the code are violated, do it by section, part, and subpart. Okay, well, it's a tiny bit early, but I'm going to call it a class. Are there any questions from either people here or people who are attending by Zoom? You know who you are. James and Winter Morgan. I'm going to post the assignment on Moodle, okay, in a few minutes, and I want you to look at the situation and say what are the specific parts of the National Society of Professional Engineers Code that would be violated or should be invoked. Okay, does that seem clear?
Okay.
Perfect.
Yeah, I got it. Thank you.
What a woman. This is why everyone admires you. Okay, well, thank you very much, guys, and I am going to ring off now and go post your quiz. So have fun. For God's sake, be careful. These are parlous times, and for that matter, there's ice on the roads and the parking lots and sidewalks, so please be careful. Talk to you later. Oh, never felt better.